Good afternoon, and welcome to Cyversity Engaged webinar celebrating International Women's Day. Breaking the bias will be the topic of our panel discussion today, and this event is in partnership with ISC Squared. Welcome to our attendees. A little bit about our Engage program. It is designed to grow, develop, and highlight careers, opportunities, and contributions to diverse talent within cybersecurity. Some of the topic areas we cover is career development, career spotlight, transitions, leadership, as well as technology talks. Also, we include diversity highlights within the program. As in today's program, we're focusing on the continued celebration of International Women's Day. Before I turn things over to our panel moderator, I will go over a few things with you. So for our attendees, you are joined in this webinar in listening mode only, but don't fret, you will get to participate. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website after today's event under on-demand resources. So we'll have our panel discussion followed by an interactive Q&A, which will be moderated by myself. And by the way, I'm Cassandra Dacus, the president of the Atlanta chapter of Cyversity. Following our discussion and questions, you'll be provided with information about Cyversity membership benefits, upcoming webinars, and also you can continue to communicate with us via the Atlanta chapter Slack channel, as well as via email to our leadership team at atlanta@cyversity.org. So now, without further ado, I'll turn things over to Dwan Jones, who is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at ISC Squared. And before I do, Dwan, a special thank you to you and Claire for your support and for partnering with us on this event.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cassandra. It's my pleasure and definitely ISC Squared's pleasure to partner with you on this great event. We're definitely excited and looking forward to a great discussion with our panelists that we have here today. Before we jump into the discussion and go into introductions of our panel, just want to set the stage of what we want to talk about today, which is breaking the bias. A recent report that ISC Squared published revealed that there's a huge disparity of women working in cybersecurity. We found that about 24% of the overall workforce is actually made up of women. And so there are persisting issues around the gender gap and the gender wage gap. And so we definitely want to talk about that today and talk about how biases are playing into that disparity and what we can really do to really take on that challenge and provide solutions for the industry overall, but also for women. Some of the things that some stats just to set the stage a little bit for our discussion. We found that 3 in 4 women experience bias at work, right? So we're looking at 75% of women experience some form of bias at work. And those who do experience that bias are more likely to leave their jobs, which is absolutely what we don't want. We see that women of color, women who belong to the LGBTQ+ community, and women with disabilities face even more acute biases in the workplace. Yet only 1 in 3 employees, and this is including managers, will actually challenge that bias behavior when they see it. So we know that many of us, probably as panelists on this call, have faced those biases, and many in our audience today have faced those things. But also when people see it happening, they're less likely to speak up about it and to try to make change. And so I know those statistics aren't necessarily staggering for our panelists, not necessarily something that's really surprising, but we want to dig into that a little bit today. And so let's get into our discussion and do some introductions. And I want to, really get to the crust of what we want to talk about today. So in introducing yourselves and who you are and where you're joining us from, I have a question that I also want to ask for each of our panelists. And that is, what is one word that comes to mind when you think about a world without gender bias? So I will start off, and I will start with Dr. Laura Jones. Hi, Dr. Jones. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Duan, and thank you for having me here today. It really is a pleasure. I'm very happy to be a part of this panel discussion and with this illustrious panel. And so I am Dr. Laura Jones. I'm a Senior Director with Hearst, Senior Director of Governance, Risk, and Compliance, GRC. And I'm joining you from Atlanta, Georgia. The one word that comes to me first when I think about a world without gender bias is happiness.
Great, thank you so much. Vanessa, welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Duan. Yes, I'm Vanessa Pegueros, and I'm located up here in Seattle, where it's not currently raining, but give it about 30 minutes. I've been in tech 30 plus years of my career, in cyber the last 19 of those years. Recently just stepped away from my operating role. I think it's kind of my last one. And I'm doing board work. I'm investing in diverse founders as an angel investor, and helping startups relative to tech and cyber. And my one word would be space.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Vivian.
Hi, I'm Vivian Soon. I'm a cybersecurity architect with IBM in Canada. And I live in Montreal, if anyone is familiar with it, where I am currently literally up to my knees in snow. I've worked in high tech my entire career, and I've been in cybersecurity for almost 5 years now. When I think about the one word to describe a world without gender bias, I think my word would be potential.
Thank you so much, Vivian, and welcome. And then Nicole, welcome to the panel.
Thank you. Good morning. Nicole Keaton-Hart. I'm currently a site director for security and compliance product for Microsoft at Atlanta. Atlanta is my home, but I'm actually in Seattle this week. And Vanessa, I asked my teams here to make a promise that there would be great weather while I was here. So I'm hoping that that rain that you mentioned holds out. I've spent 26 years of my career in IT, most of that time in leadership roles, helping organizations solve complex problems around technology risk and cybersecurity, where I've spent 17 years of that time. Today, in addition to my role at Microsoft, I serve as a board member for the Technology Association of Georgia and Iden House Consulting. I also spend a great deal of time advising corporate boards how to have conversations with CISOs and the C-suite regarding your cybersecurity posture. Happy to be here.
And Nicole, what would your one word be?
My one word would be innovation.
Innovation. Great. So that really doesn't seem impossible, right? Innovation and space and happiness in a gender equal world. And so, I know from my perspective, I know we can get there. And I think we all believe, okay, we can get there, but there's some hard work to do, right? So as we think about those, situations or gender-based challenges or those biases that are in place, I want to hear from each of you, what are some of those challenges that you have faced in the workplace and how have you overcome them? And I will start with Vanessa.
So I think the main, being in tech my whole career, I think one of the big biases I've faced pretty much throughout my career has been the perception that women aren't technical, that women don't really understand the sciences as well. You know, men are like naturally inclined to that where women aren't. And I think the way I really dealt with that in my career was being excellent around everything that I decided to focus on. And being bold enough to have those conversations with men to kind of demonstrate to them that I did know what I was talking about, and I challenged them. And once I was able to do that, I think I got more of their respect. I do think, though, the challenge with the general problem is that you have to do that over and over. If you start a new job, you have to do it. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter how many years in your career you seem to always have to continue to prove yourself over in different environments.
That's so true. And I want to ask a follow-up question to that, Vanessa, and you finding, okay, I have to do that over and over and over again. And, how does that affect your work on the job and your psyche and your productivity, as far as being able to keep pushing ahead, even though you have to do it over and over?
I think we all just develop a level of resilience that we become stronger if we don't really if we don't take that in, we don't take that bias into ourselves, and we remain strong around what we know about ourselves, not what others know about us, but what we know. And I think when we can have that solid foundation internally, you can there can be a lot of attacks toward you, but you realize you're going to still make your way out of it, and you're going to thrive in some situations. So I think, and then if a situation becomes too negative, my approach, and having worked in, I don't know, I think 16 different jobs in my career, is move on. Don't stay in a bad environment if it's not going to support you.
I see all of us nodding our heads to that last point about making sure you make the move if you need to put yourself in a better situation. Vivian, what about your experiences and challenges that you face?
Well, similar to Vanessa, I've spent my entire career in tech and 100% having to establish technical credibility over and over and over again. Like Vanessa, I decided early in my career that I was just going to be as excellent as I could be at what I was doing. And I made sure that every opportunity I pursued was an area that I was personally excited about. I realized early on that, my superpower is my empathy and my passion for technology. So I made sure that I found roles where I could really distinguish myself that way. When it comes to biases and obstacles that I've encountered, I'm in a very good spot right now where, I have allies around me. I am well respected by my peers. I've been very fortunate in my career that I've had very supportive managers as well. But that does not stop the constant, that does not stop, all the microaggressions that come up day after day, and it never stops surprising me. You're sitting there in a meeting, this happens to me regularly. I'll be sitting there in a meeting, and then somebody will tell the client we're meeting with that they're going to open the kimono. And even though it happens like 3 or 4 times a year, and every time my reaction is like, dude, I'm sitting right here, it still surprises me every single time. And it always sets me back, that moment where suddenly, I'm 23 years old and unsure of myself again, and unsure, do I really belong in this room? As Vanessa said, you just kind of have to learn to develop that resilience. I've had to, I have my little script that I tell myself to remember who I am and why I'm here, but it never really goes away.
I like that, having the script about who you are and making sure you rehearse that over and over again, especially when you're going into a difficult situation.
Yeah, there
Nicole?
may be a little voice in the back of my head that screams, I am Moana.
Definitely. Nicole, what about you?
In a way, it's interesting to hear the experiences of my colleagues on the panel. And while I am not shocked, it does take you back a moment, right? And not only positions you to relive or rethink about those past experiences that you have, but you begin thinking about the collective audience of women that are experiencing these challenges. And I'll share an example or a tidbit with you. I remember being in an organization that brought me in to solve a problem that was going to report to their corporate board, and at risk was their public profile and reputation as a conservative organization. And I nailed the challenge that they asked me to come in and take upon. And when I started that journey, there were people inside the organization that said, hey, are you crazy? Like, if there's a miscalculation or a misstep, your career could end on this. Like, the wire to walk for success is so slim. Are you sure you're going to do this? And I was up for the challenge, and I led a team, and we accomplished what the organization asked of us and more. And I'll never forget that after having been in the company's top 1% of the company's performers, I was sitting down with a leader of the organization, and we were talking about feedback. And the feedback that I received as an executive was, you wear too many dark suits. Like, not that your suits and your attire aren't appropriate, but you wear too many dark suits. Like, you wear a lot of black suits and blue suits and gray suits and maybe some tan and brown suits, but you wear too many dark color suits. And at that moment, I was floored, because how could this organization that I had just stepped in and done this great thing for, something that most people would shy away from and walk away, and led a team that didn't believe and didn't think it was possible, led us to success. And my feedback is, you wear too many brown, gray, and blue suits. And I struggled with that, because how many men would we ever tell in a corporate environment, after you accomplish something wonderful, that you wear too many brown, gray, or blue suits? All right. And so that moment was devastating. But what it also did was, similar to Vanessa, it made me very focused on me and my superpowers. My superpower is being able to see risk, being able to see what looks like unrelated dots around the corner, and devise strategies that make organizations successful. And from that moment forward, I embraced what I did, what I was good at, and that became my personal pursuit. And like Vanessa, when those sort of things became overwhelming or too frequent in the organization, even though you've built up this emotional resilience, that was a cue that I was destined to do bigger and better things. And that was the opportunity to seek the next opportunity and not be complacent with that sort of environment.
So that, even though that might have been a negative experience, to hear that feedback, it still pushed you to keep moving forward and to move past that, and to really know, okay, this is where I am today, but not necessarily where I'm going to be tomorrow.
Absolutely. And I thought about it in the beginning, it was hurtful. It was devastating. And I did have male colleagues that were very supportive. And when I asked them, have you ever been told that you wear too many blue suits? Right? You can imagine the look on their face. But that also allowed me to have a very real conversation with my colleagues that would ultimately support me and become allies in a very different way. But I had to be vulnerable enough to be able to drive those conversations, where I was almost certain going into it that my male colleagues had never been told, you wear too many brown, blue, or black suits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Dr. Jones.
Yes, Dwan, these are really, really great examples, and the stories are very interesting and telling, because there's certainly a common thread that runs, amongst our experiences, and it's great to be able to share these scenarios and then the strategies that we used as well, and hopefully they'll help someone who's out there and listening. And so, I didn't share a lot about my background in the opening, but I will say, just as a quick snapshot, that I've been in the information security sector since 2007, particularly risk management more specifically. And as well, before that, I spent 21 years in the Army active duty. And so the bias kind of began there. And it was a lot of gender bias. The way I started in the military was with some of your more male-dominated units, 7.5 years with the 5th Special Forces, and another, say, 3 years with the 101st Airborne Air Assault Screaming Eagles. And the reason I bring that up is because I recall, and I've always loved to MC and attend formal events and things like that. And so I began to really develop a talent for emceeing. And so I was requested quite a bit to MC various change of command ceremonies and award ceremonies, et cetera. Well, at the time, Fort Campbell, Kentucky had never had a woman, what they call voice of the eagle. And it was the person who comes across the loudspeaker. You can hear them all across the installation because there was a major change of command going on. And I was asked by my command to audition, so I did. And I was selected. They told me that I could be an alternate voice of the eagle, even though I was told, I'd gotten first place. And so, I wasn't really satisfied with that. I didn't have to be number one, but the reasons that they gave me didn't sit well with me. And what they told me was, we've never had a female's voice come across the mic, the speakers at a top ceremony or top ceremonies like this. And it's just not going to be acceptable to hear your voice. We have commanders that just aren't going to want that as they're retiring and moving on. And so I was actually called to one of the more senior officers for the whole installation to come up there and hear the same message, that we're just not ready for it. You're a woman, and there's other factors playing out, is what I was told, and we're just not ready for that. So what I will tell you is that being at that time, being a bit younger, and also understanding that it was some momentum, some ground that we had gained in that area, I went ahead and I accepted the number 2 position because I did feel that it was a way to break a barrier, and even if I had to have select ceremonies that I would MC, I would start there, and hopefully it would open the door for someone else. So if we, come present day and along the journey of information security, cybersecurity, I think the challenge that sticks out or stuck out the most for me in the past really was being, one of the only women or the only woman in a conference room and saying something, and then having someone say the exact same thing that you just said, and you really just want to say, didn't I just say that? I know I just said that. And so, that does still happen from time to time as, as a woman. But what I'll do now is, because it does happen, it still happens. But what I do is I'll take intentional pauses. I'll let them finish. And I'll literally say, I think we're in alignment. That is exactly what I said. Or I'll just be deliberate with, how I respond. I don't make a big deal out of it, but I do let them know that I have a voice. I'm in the room, and that's what I just said. So great idea. Great minds think alike. So those have been some of my experiences that kind of stand out the most for me.
So you've had to be bold and to really,
Yes.
make sure that your voice is heard.
Absolutely.
That, even if you want to speak over me, I'm still going to bring it back to the fact that I was the first person that stated that, and do it respectfully, but want to make sure you hear that.
Yeah, and it has its place, right? I don't always come back and say, well, I just said that. It has its place, and you have to kind of also be strategic, because I like to think of myself as someone that when I do speak, it's kind of like the old E.F. Hutton commercial. I'm not there just to continue to talk, but if I talk, I have something or speak, I have something that I need to say, and it's worth hearing. So I don't just, try and command the room or the table or what have you, but there's a place for that, and I certainly will address it. And I definitely encourage the young women, my whole team. I have men and women, but I have young women that that's on my team and that I'm mentoring and coaching and counseling, and I make sure they use their voice to the point where I'll actually coach them. You might want to speak up just a little bit, or if you see me do this, because I want them to use their voice. So absolutely.
I love those little cues to help people, to help them grow and to help make sure that their voices are heard.
That's
And
right.
that actually leads into my next question. And Dr. Jones, you talked about, often being the only one in the room, or maybe being one of two women in the room. And we talked about how oftentimes you might feel like there's only a few opportunities to go around. And maybe I have to look out for me or look out for myself in order to make sure that I can get access to that opportunity. And it's probably unspoken, but it does happen. What are some of the things that we can do to really support each other and, eliminate that notion that there's only one opportunity for one of us, or there's only one access point for one woman or one person of color in the room? How do you address that? And how can we really support each other and support maybe younger women who are growing into their own? And I'll start with Vivian on that.
I think it's really important, first of all, to make sure that you have a point of view on whatever it is the discussion is about, whether it's very technically focused or it's more about project planning or what have you. You have to have your own point of view, and the more you can crystallize on that, then the easier it is for you to find opportunities to say, well, this is my point of view, but my colleague across the table has a different perspective and we should hear from her, to try and create those opportunities. I think that it's really important for all of us. You have to understand your superpower. You have to develop your own point of view. You have to internalize that. And then the opportunities to coach and mentor and encourage others tend to fall naturally as long as you remain open to them.
Absolutely. And going back to that, knowing your superpower and knowing who you are and what you bring to the table. Vanessa, I know we spoke before specifically around this topic, and you had some really great advice on this point as well.
Yeah, I think that in my career, unfortunately, I think some of my bigger obstacles or kind of friction points have come from other women. Even when there were very few of us in the room, maybe I was the only one, but there might have been another one. And I feel like we need to support each other better. And there's really tangible ways to do that. I think if you take a very specific example, you're in a meeting and as Dr. Jones mentioned, somebody, maybe there's hopefully at least two women in the room, and maybe Dr. Jones says something and then a male colleague says the same thing. I mean, let's say I was in the room, I would say, well, like, instead of you kind of collaborate in that rebuttal, like, I think Dr. Jones had a great point, and that, we should do this. And like, also, if especially if you're a more senior person in your career and you're a younger woman in the room and they get talked over, I've often said, well, wait a minute, Dewan just said that. I will be the one who kind of takes a little bit more of the, I don't want to say aggressive, but definitely will put yourself out there. Or I think we need to let Dewan speak because she's trying to say something, and cut some of the men off sometimes when they do that. So I think just being there for each other, and in those very, like, those little small moments, like those will impact you, because other men in the room will see that and they'll say, I've had men come to me and say, yeah, I didn't realize I was doing that. They won't say it in front of everybody, but they'll come separately and they'll say, I really appreciate you bringing that to my attention. And so I think that is, taking those moments, those real, like, teachable moments, and being strong enough to speak out and support other women. And also, I think we as women need to, like, change our mindset. It's not about scarcity. We have to come from a viewpoint of abundance. There doesn't only have to be one or two. Why is it only one or two? I think part of the challenge we have, like in my experience in the boardroom, I've seen companies who are like, okay, I've got to get a minority and I've got to get a woman on my board. Okay, I'm going to go get like a Black or a Latina woman. and I only need one because I'm satisfying the requirement. That's not the approach we need. We need to be like, it isn't about just meeting the rule of the law in California, for example, but you need to like really understand, like, it's not just about that token or that we aren't that. We bring so much more to that. And so when a woman of color gets on a board, I talk to them about this before. I'm like, you have an obligation to get other women of color on these board. That's your job now. Like, you've got to change it. And it's not easy. It's very difficult, but that needs to be our mission. It's not just one. We don't want, if we're the only one, something's wrong. Something's wrong. Like, we need to bring on more. There doesn't have to be one out of, 8 to 10 directors is a woman is kind of broken, in a board. So that's I think we just have to be that change and continue to push for the change.
And that notion of lifting as we climb, right? So we're lifting and growing, and let's lift up others along the way and make sure that we're bringing others along the journey as well.
Yes.
Nicole, would love to hear your perspective on this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's been a lot of comments here that I fully support around things that we can do while we're in the room. And so I'll talk a little bit about the things that we can do when other women aren't necessarily in the room with us. And so I think so much of my focus has been around creating those opportunities for other women to have social capital and social mobility. And what that means is access and being able to bring other women into circles where they have not been included. And so that means being very intentional. A lot of times it means being an advocate and being a sponsor for women that I know very well, to bring them into the fold, to bring their name into conversations, to bring them into circles where they don't have access today. And along with that, sure, there's coaching, there's guidance, and being that support system. But it's really about when you look around and you're in an event or a leadership event and you're the only woman in the room. Well, next time I'll bring 5 other women with me, just to kind of change the dynamics. And, and let's pick women that maybe wouldn't have been invited into those sort of circles in the first place. And so I spend a great deal of my time not only making my network available to other women, but extending it, right? Being that person that's really connecting and creating opportunity. And one of the other things that I've done too, when we look at opportunities and, as Vanessa mentioned, that somebody's seeking a woman or a diverse woman for a particular role, I actually encourage people that I think very highly of in my network to consider that opportunity. And so even if I'm considering the opportunity, I'm like, look, at the end of the day, the organization is going to consider X number of people for the position. And so why not put into that candidate pool a great pool of capable women? And so sometimes that's something that seems a little bit counterintuitive or countervailing to say, well, no, when we're looking at opportunities, invite those that you think would do a great job, whether you're considering self or not, to be a part of that candidate pool. Because at the end of the day, I'd rather want a great leader that I brought into the fold to have access to that opportunity than not, because they didn't know about it or they weren't aware or they didn't have the connection to the organization to even be considered. So.
Absolutely. And the conversation is going so well and time is passing us by. I want to make sure we get to a few of these other questions. And one of the ones specifically that I know is top of mind for me and in some of our sessions around just gender bias is the gender wage gap issue. And so we know that a lot of these biases and challenges that we've talked about really lead to or contribute to that severe wage gap for women, and specifically leading to or threatening the economic security for women and their families. And some of the statistics around this came from the Center of American Progress in their Women of Color and the Wage Gap study that they did. They found that over the course of a 40-year career, that Black women lose an estimated $600 or $964,000 to the wage gap. Native American women lose around $986,000. Hispanic women lose $1.16 million over that 40-year span. And then Asian American and Pacific Islander women lose around 400,000. And that's all compared to white men over the course of a career. And that is, again, staggering statistics, things that should not be the case. And want to hear from our panelists around, what can we do to both individually and collectively change this? Because if you think about, that's not just threatening the economic security of the family now, but that's generations down the road that affects. And what can we do individually and collectively to change that? And I'll start with you, Dr. Laura.
Okay, thank you. When I'm on panels, I don't ever talk organization specific, but I do want to say in this moment that this is where I believe Hearst excels. And to Nicole's great point about making sure you have a diverse and talented and qualified slate of individuals to choose from, to start there. But one of the things that Hearst does really well is to make sure that even when they're writing the job descriptions, or we're writing our position descriptions, we're making sure we use very inclusive language. We're looking to make sure that the roles, the past performance experience that we're looking for doesn't automatically rule anyone out, because maybe a role has traditionally been filled by men. And so you have far fewer women than to consider from, going forward. And so, we're really on top of just making sure that when our hiring practices are fair and that we're really looking at those things, I think that's one thing that we can do. I think also to make sure that when we get into positions where we can hire, to make sure that we are, looking at, again, a very diverse slate. So it's not just here, maybe this is, just generally speaking now, this is what I was given, here's the slate. And maybe there are women, maybe no women. And then we can also say something about that, right? Because there are strategic initiatives around DEI going on in a lot of organizations. So we want to also make sure that we support the organization there as well. And, the other thing I think about too is sometimes we have, folks that are working for us where we may know that they're not necessarily receiving a competitive challenge. Competitive salary, and they may be challenged by that. So why not go back and take a look at their position description and think about what it would take to get them, to a fair salary that's very competitive. There are also a lot of strategic initiatives around attracting and retaining talent, right? Versus the attrition and having to start over again. So to make sure that they're compensated fairly, make sure we can do a market salary adjustment, where applicable, and just do the right things by those that work for us, especially women, since we are traditionally underpaid, and especially women of color, at that. So those are a couple of the things that I would offer.
Absolutely. And doing those market adjustments and market adjustments are so important for organizations to not only do once, but to continue to do that, because you can easily fall back into where you were before. Vivian, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time talking to cybersecurity teams about how they can optimize their security operations. And I think that we see a convergence of a number of forces here. First of all, there's a huge cyber wage gap. We are job gap, right? We're literally not able to train people fast enough for all the jobs in cyber that we need filled. So there's immense opportunity there. And then at the same time, we look at how a lot of security teams operate. You're talking about teams that have to make split-second decisions and operate under a lot of pressure with very high stakes. They have to be able to scramble and mobilize very quickly. And the collaboration dynamics and how the team functions holistically is really under focus right now from cybersecurity leaders. And the answer isn't just throw more tech at it, throw some AI at it, and bias in AI. It's a whole other topic that we could talk about another day. But when you start looking at any kind of team function, especially under that kind of pressure cooker environment, if you're not also looking at the diversity of the team and the value of having people with different experiences, different viewpoints, then you're missing out. On a very fundamental level, a cybersecurity analyst has to have really good cognitive abilities in pattern detection, in sussing out anomalies in a string of data. And, the ability to do that has nothing to do with gender or race. So if we were to focus more on the cognitive abilities and the makeup of our teams and what you need to have a high performing team, we know that more diverse teams are higher functioning. So, specifically around cybersecurity, if your leadership is not looking at that, then you are missing a huge potential, and you're, shoeboxing your teams in to very rigid ways of operating and functioning, which is not good for improving your security posture.
Absolutely. So starting with that diversity from the get-go, from the beginning, having that diversity built into the teams will lead to more diversity down the line.
Yeah, and there has to be an open conversation about that, about, hey, why is your SOC made up of 95% white guys with red beards?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Vanessa, your thoughts on how we can, individually or collectively tackle the gender wage gap issue?
Yeah, it's a big challenge. And not to mention that, trying to do those wage adjustments internally in a company can be very challenging because the gaps are so large and the budgets allocated are not enough to do those adjustments. So there has to be a change at the very top of the company if you really want to do meaningful wage adjustments. And there has to be transparency there to some, to allow that understanding. But I think one of the biggest important elements for women, and particularly women of color, is to come at this from the very beginning of their career from a mindset of financial independence. And I think it's not enough to just have a good paying job. You need to think about, how can I be financially independent at a point in my life and career? And I think independence allows you to take more risks. It allows you to, if you have to walk away from a very caustic job that's taking a toll on you emotionally or physically, you're able to do that. And I think that financial independence really starts with, advocating for yourself, knowing how to negotiate, keeping a good market pulse on, like, getting to know a recruiter and asking them how much are people getting paid in this particular role, just like doing your research about a particular promotion or role you're going to take on, and then being able to take the risk to say, this job, this company is not willing to pay me for what I'm worth. I'm going to go out and look for a job, work with a company that is willing to pay me. And I think we, in our communities, I know for me, it's tough to do that because sometimes, especially many of us, not all of us, but come from, more challenging socioeconomic, where we didn't grow up rich, essentially. And so we also have the challenge of supporting our family members in many situations who also, I'm the first person to go to college in my family, and I have, there's a lot of responsibility that sits on our shoulders when you're the first educated person to get, my first job out of college, I made more money than my dad had made, so I never told him that because that's not, it's a tough thing, but we have to also balance the fact that, like, you look at these tech startups and you look at the makeup of the founders, they're typically white males. They are going public or selling their companies for billions of dollars. They're reaping the rewards of the risks that they take. And we're being left out of that. We're being left out of that wealth creation. And we need to change our mindset and start taking, and I'm not saying don't take a good job, but with a big company, but you're not going to get the kind of wealth creation at a big company that you would at taking somewhere where you take a little bit more of a risk and you join the team early. It's not like people think, oh, I'm not going to get paid at a startup. That's not true. That you get paid working at a startup. It's just, the risk is higher. That startup may not make it, but if it makes it, you're gonna get the benefits of it and understand understand equity and how that works, and advocate for equity when you come in. So that would be my those are kind of my bits of advice.
Yeah, that's great advice, Vanessa. So much great nuggets and pieces of advice from our great panelists today. So I hope the audience is writing. I've seen some comments where folks are saying, I'm writing all of these down. Great examples, and I'm looking at the time and want to make sure that we jump into some engagement from the audience and making sure that we have time for this panelist to answer your questions. So please put your questions in the chat. And I will turn it over to Cassandra, who will take us through the chat and any questions that the audience will have for our panelists.
Let me unmute. Okay. Thank you so much, ladies, for that dialogue. A lot of good nuggets, like you said, Dwan. I hope I was sitting here taking notes, definitely. So I hope our attendees were as well. If you have any questions right now, please post them in the chat session. I did have one person who wanted to expound a little bit more on how do you specifically handle microaggressions. And Vivian, I don't know if you would like to speak to that, or yeah.
I can speak to that. It's so the short answer is I don't handle them very well. It's and I think it's a really difficult thing because there is so much crap that we have all internalized, and I don't know how many opportunities. I certainly haven't had a lot of opportunities to have an unemotional conversation about something that cuts so deep. I know that the best way to deal with a microaggression is unemotionally, and that frankly is something that I'm not super good at. I've been more intentional lately in trying to cultivate and find allies, mostly because I had the experience fairly recently where at a social gathering, something happened, and then out of the blue, a friend spoke up for me. And I was so gobsmacked by what happened and how we handled it. And I realized that, in a social setting like that, no one had done that for me before. Not my husband, not my friends, not my parents, not colleagues. And it made me really think about how important allyship is. And sometimes, it's more important that you take care of yourself, that you try to create a teachable moment for someone else, right? You've got to take care of yourself first. But then going through who I know and who could and should be an ally and finding ways to have that conversation, that's been a really big turning point for me personally in the last couple of years. I know that sometimes just a very simple and calm, what did you mean by that, is a good way of opening the conversation. But that is still something that I'm personally working really hard on trying to practice, because it's got to be done unemotionally, and that's super hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, I see another question here. What would you advise about being held to a much higher standard for hiring and promotion, being a minority woman? And anyone who would like to address that question, feel free.
Go ahead and tackle that. And that's such a difficult question, right? Because when we look at what happens in organizations, for whatever reason, like, being able to talk about things like compensation or accomplishment that's tied to compensation aren't normally things that people are freely talking about in the workplace. But how I've addressed that is, I always look at not just the execution of work or the execution of task as the measure of how I want to have a conversation about myself, but rather the outcomes, right? And the value that you bring. And I found that it was much easier to have conversations from an impact perspective and really make it about me and less about the other person or the other people that I felt had some advantage or, maybe had been considered differently. But I've had those conversations to say, when I think about my impact or the impact that I've made to the organization, here's the things that I've done. And oh, by the way, because of these things that I've done, here's how this organization is better. Here's how the company is better. Here's how we changed or repositioned ourselves in the market, or here's how we shifted the focus on, our customer base. And as a result, here's how we've changed our vendor partner relationships, or here's how we changed outcomes. And when I talk more specifically from a cybersecurity perspective, it's looking at how have you shaped the organization differently, and how have you allowed the organization to succeed under your leadership, and how have you brought others along. And I felt that when I could have those conversations, and I'm going to steal one of Vivian's words, that it was unemotional, right? That, I could take the emotion out of feeling like I was left out, or I was cheated, or I was slighted, but really make it a conversation to have around impact to organization. And yes, I would say, hey, when I think about these things, I see this as something that very few leaders of this company are doing, and begin positioning to share your viewpoint, to have that conversation in a way that gets you to where you want to be. At the end of the day, I want to know why my impact isn't compensated. But I found that, leveraging that as an entry point to conversation has certainly made it easier. And it's made it easier for those I'm communicating with. And also for me, it allowed me to take the emotion out of those moments.
Great. Thank you for that response, Nicole. Awesome. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
I would only add, I agree, like if you can get to that point where you have a way to take the emotion out, it's a great path to take. I think as human beings, like it's hard still. Like part of it is for me, accepting that life isn't fair and equal, and that I want to strive to make it more fair and equal, but it isn't. And if you think about the women who came before us,
yes,
their positions were even less fair and equal. And so to me, it's a continuum of getting to that place where we all want to be. And in the meantime, we have to, I don't think accept, but come to a point where you realize that that is the way it is, unfortunately. And that you're gonna be an agent to try and change it as much as you can.
And that's a very key point, be an agent for change as much as possible, right?
The other thing that I would offer to that point is, I take a longer term view as well. We address things in the moment and we get after them as soon as we can. But I would also say to get ready and stay ready, because if things aren't going to change anytime soon, then we have to deal with that head on. One of the ways that I do that, it's a strategy for Laura, is education, training. It's being prepared. It's being prepared for opportunity, and it's also creating your own opportunity. And not that getting all the education and all the certifications and all of that is going to seal the deal every time. But for some people, if they can use it as a disqualifier because you don't have those credentials, they're going to use it. So we want to remove some of that as a distraction as much as possible. At least I do. And so that began as a consultant after the military. I spent 10 years as a global management consultant. And so, there began the journey of making sure that as my name was submitted as a contractor or a consultant, that my calling card, part of my calling card was my profile, my credentials, to allow them to speak for me before I even got into the room, to say that I am qualified. And so that's a sort of a longer term strategy that I tend to use, and have never really moved away from that because it has served me well.
Great strategy, Dr. Jones, great strategy. No one can speak to your education and the credentials that you bring. They can't discount that. So thank you. Okay, so we're about 5 minutes until the hour. I do have one last question for someone to answer. And then if you could give a final thought, Duan. After that, we'll wrap things up and I'll provide more information on Cyversity and close things out. Before I do that, I'd like to say to our attendees There is a chat posted in the chat session, a link to a survey. We ask that you complete that and provide feedback on today's event. So last question here, very quickly. Has there been a book that helped shape your career? Do any of you have any recommendations on books that helped to shape your career?
Cassandra, I'll throw out a book, and maybe it's not one that shaped my career, but it's one that I very much enjoyed reading over the last couple of years. But it's Unapologetically Ambitious by Shelley Archerbaum. And I so enjoyed reading her book and her journey about imposter syndrome and what it was like to be a CEO in the technology industry. And that is one of my favorites.
Well, thank you for that. And that imposter syndrome is a very valid issue, especially in this industry with us. So thank you for sharing that book. Okay, Dewan, for you, do you have any other comments before we close out? And before you start, I would just like to say to Nicole, Dr. Jones, Vanessa, Vivian, thank you all so much. When I reached out to you, you had no problem with responding to agree to be part of today's event. I thank you for that. I thank you for your time and all the wonderful advice that you provided. And I stopped counting, but the word support came up numerous times in this discussion today. So call to action, let's support one another. To our male allies out there, support us. And someday we'll reach that full inclusion. Dewan?
I love that, Cassandra. I think you helped us end on a really great note. I too want to thank all of the panelists for your time and great discussion today. I said it before, but I'll say it again. There are many great nuggets and things that I'm definitely taking away from our conversation today, and hope that attendees did as well. So thank you so much in our celebration of International Women's Day and Women's History Month here in the US. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'll turn it back over to you, Cassandra, to take us out.
Thank you. Okay. Very quickly, I would like to tell you about Cyversity's mission, having very much to do with today's event, right? So our mission and our goal is to achieve the consistent representation of women and underrepresented minorities in the cybersecurity industry through programs designed to diversify, educate, and empower. The Cyversity tackles the great divide, cyber divide, with scholarship opportunities, diverse workforce development, innovative outreach, and mentoring programs. Some of our membership benefits we offer to our members is to explore. There's a tool called Cyversity where you can learn more about the various cybersecurity roles, in-demand jobs by locations, and career trends. Also, we include an assessment tool called Competency Core, where you can assess your readiness for different cybersecurity roles. And then development through our engaged programs, scholarship programs we have, and training. We have about 14 training partners, as well as the mentorship program. And then connection through our local chapters and through the Cyversity Village on our Slack channel. And to learn more, please see us our website at www.cyversity.org. And very briefly here, we have a screen that shows you the advantages of becoming a member as well as what you get as a non-member. So I encourage you to join. We have student membership fees as well as professional fees. Okay. And lastly, I would like to go out on Thank you for attending today's events, and please come back and join us in 2 weeks for another Engage event on ethical hacking hosted by the chapter with Black Girls Hat, and also attend other Cyversity Engage events. Thank you so much for your time today. Remember to stay safe and stay connected. Thank you.